Welcome, everyone. I don't have a title slide for the overarching program, so this is just the slide from the first talk. So we have three separate presentations today. I don't know which one you've come for, but I can guarantee you they're all going to be awesome. So, but these are all projects that explore interpretation through digital media in and outside the museum. They're different projects, but we wanted to give everybody enough time to present their ideas and a little Q&A time as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to start right away. I'll be the first speaker, and then we're going to let each of these conversations go, and then get like 5-minute Q&A time, and then we'll go on to the next session. At the end, we're hopefully going to have 15 or 20 minutes left over, and we can have sort of a general conversation about sort of shared concerns or things of that nature. So the presenters today are myself. I'm John Russick. I'm the Director of Curatorial Affairs for the Chicago History Museum. I'll be sharing the presentation with Alan Rhodes, who is a professor at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and we'll be talking about the development of a prototype app for the Chicago History Museum that will be pushing content out of the museum and into the city. The second presenter will be Samantha Diamond. She's the principal and co-founder of CultureConnect in New York. And she'll be speaking about a smartphone app and an object-oriented learning module that they've developed. And the last speaker will be Sarah Brockett, and she's with Antenna Audio. And she's going to be talking about a project called Talking Statues. And so very different sorts of projects, but some overlap as well. So I'm going to just jump right in here talking about this app that we're developing in Chicago. The subtext of this talk is really about creativity and being open to new possibilities and really trying to use the opportunities that digital media offer to you and your organization to create something new and maybe something unexpected and sort of pushing things in new directions. And at the core of this is a chance meeting. Alan and I both live in Chicago, but we didn't know each other until we were both at a museums conference in Korea. And it was sort of a strange thing. We were sitting next to each other on a bus, and we started talking. And you know, it turns out that we work like 5 miles apart from each other, but we'd never met before. And when we got back to Chicago, we had lunch or coffee. I can't remember, but we just started talking about the possibility of doing something together, just because it would be fun to do, and why not, right? And so right away, we were talking about projects that would be feasible. And of course, I was interested in something along the lines of what he had been presenting there in Korea. He was working on digital platforms that I really am sort of embarrassingly naive and inexperienced with. And so I was very interested in seeing ways that we might develop something with history in our collection that might take advantage of his expertise and his skills. And he was interested in doing something that was out in the city of Chicago, thinking about something that would be more dynamic learning experience. And of course, Alan will be up here in a minute, and he can talk about what his motivations were too. But the advantage was we were both just interested in starting something, sort of along the lines of the conference theme. We were thinking about something that might be big someday, but certainly we wanted to start in a small, sort of manageable, modest way, develop something that we were both interested in, and see what would come of it. Chicago 00 refers to an intersection in Chicago. Is anybody from Chicago? Anybody familiar with Chicago? So Chicago, if anybody like throws out 2 numbers at me, and I can tell you where that is in Chicago, right? Chicago is developed around this intersection right downtown. It's a grid system. State and Madison is in central part of the city. It's 0, 0, 0 east, 0 west, 0 north, 0 south in the street grid. So if you throw out any number, you know where a person is. If they say I'm at 2400 north and 300 west, you know what intersection that is. So it's fundamental in Chicago to sort of, if you live there, you sort of get accustomed to this and you start thinking about the city that way. So it seemed like a natural starting point for something that didn't really have anything beyond a desire to get started and sort of see where it took us. So sort of a nice metaphor for not really knowing where we were going with this project and just wanted to get started doing something. And I say all that because because we didn't have a clear goal, interpretive goal for this project, and we really wanted to develop something and sort of see where it took us, the opportunity then became, so what are the resources that we could tap into right away? So Alan works at the Art Institute, so the intersection of State and Madison is fairly close to where he works. I went back to the museum and started looking for visual material in our collection that might work into an app that would be bringing historical material into the contemporary city. And I started looking at the streets downtown that might best be used for a prototype. And State Street, it's a very, it's a significant street in downtown Chicago. It's got a rich history, so we have a lot of images in the collection from State Street. So we started building off of this notion that State and Madison and State Street itself could become sort of the beginnings of a prototype of something. And so it was very sort of convenience-based. Wasn't what the strategies were not thought through in any sort of grand scheme. But what happened then was that we started thinking about how to move the project forward. And I would just say that I think this is a project that's happening sort of under the radar at the museum. I don't think anybody feels like this is a sort of a sanctioned project. I don't think that anyone would object to it happening, but it's happening mostly because it's not affecting my work, and I'm really the only person on staff who's spending any real time on this project. We have a few people in our photographers who are scanning the material for me, but other than that, it's a pretty limited impact on staff time. And because of this nature of this collaboration and Alan volunteering his time, because this is a project he's interested in too, we're able to really keep the costs basically at zero for this. So the research this is a picture of one area of the prints and photograph collection at the Chicago History Museum. It might look very familiar to you if you've got photographic collections, these gray boxes that are acid-free and preserving the collection. And what I've done is recruited a bunch of interns to come and comb through the collection looking for visual material that might work in this context. So we've gone through boxes and boxes of photographic material looking for images that could work for this particular application. And then this other image is just one of the photographers doing some scanning work for this project. And this is really the only other staff implication for the museum. So we're working on a prototype. It doesn't have sort of it hasn't been projectized, as I would, you might say, at the museum. But nevertheless, it's happening and it's moving forward. And people are actually, at this point, because of some of the material that Alan's going to show you in a minute, they're getting very excited about it at the museum. There's a interest. The development office is looking at the content that we've developed so far, which is purely a visual experience, as you'll see in a minute. They're interested in the possibilities of raising funds for this and taking on this project in a more substantive way. So just in the spirit of the nature of this conference, this is very much a project that sort of came from the passions of staff, didn't require any real commitment on the part of the organization initially, and yet here it is, it's moving forward, and all of a sudden the organization is embracing something that has sort of come from this grassroots process. I think the thing that I'd like to do now is have Alan come up and talk a little bit about the technology and the process that from his perspective, and then maybe after he's shown some of that, we could both talk a little bit about the next steps and what we see as happening next, because this is very much seen as a work in progress and a product that doesn't really have an end game at this point other than to be this prototype to get conversations started. So, Alan Rhodes.
Thanks, John. I think when we were imagining this, we were kind of imagining this would just be at the end of the table and there wouldn't be this sort of dramatic cross back and forth for both of us to do this. I'm going to show this in just a set of videos. It's when we met in Korea, I was presenting on this question of like, well, what is augmented reality in the context of a museum and looking at projects, which I'm kind of interested in that idea, the way someone who's working at a university and an art school can be interested in ideas a little bit, sort of dispassionately. But also, I think it's interesting in the context of what John was talking about, that I'm used to collaborative projects, coming out of background in cinema and documentary filmmaking, and then some stuff in the art gallery, and really just sort of making projects around these ideas of what's an interesting question, what is something that we feel like is worth expressing, what can get a response from the community and the audience. And so these videos here, the first one was my first experience, like I was doing this stuff just coming out of cinema back in 2006 and 2007, and then it led in 2008, 9, 10 into doing stuff for phones and devices. That one that's still on the screen was from theater, but another one was like this limited edition plate set, and then other ones were phone publications. And then I was doing these talks with these marker-based cards, and these two are from the one in Korea where I was talking about this idea of like, well, what about museums and technology? But a lot of these were collaborations. Like these were kind of solo things, but this limited edition playset was a collaboration with an artist, and the one in theater and publishing these things to phones with like a little group collective. So I was really interested in this idea of collaborations and kind of answering questions through collaboration, sort of trying to, in that freedom that you have, maybe outside of a sort of specific contract and a specific set of goals, to really ask some fresh questions or some critical questions. And so a lot of these talks were about that. I was really interested in this like self-reflexive video performance, you know, to ask questions about this technology, using the technology, and sort of give talks that were made up of the stuff I was talking about. This is kind of like what I was talking about, is like the way that augmented reality and different institutions gets kind of like, it gets tripped up by its own fantasies of what it is, which I think in a lot of ways comes from stuff like this, Defenders of the Galaxy and Minority Report. And like these things create our ideas of like, oh, this might be what it's like to see history with a phone. Like this is a great example and pretty recent, where he just pulls out this device and it, like a garden hose, it sprays history onto this deserted landscape for, you know, to see it perfectly, which I think is a real desire. But obviously, like when you're actually dealing with the real thing, there's limitations. And so this is what we've put together. I think this next is a video of that. Oh no, I'm sorry. But so in doing it myself, I've often dealt with these real contexts. And so this is a project just completed in Sacramento. And we based it off of, idea-wise, the real model of a set of commissioned sculptors making sculptures for public artworks along a street in Sacramento. And this was just released back in September. But those sculptures were all then rendered into 3D models and seen with phones. But I think the thing that really grounded the work was this idea of basing it on some sort of existing model, the idea of public sculpture. And even the ways that they were produced, the ways they were commissioned, the funding from the NEA, all those things followed this established model. And then that as a springboard, we kind of asked these questions of, so how do we do it for this device or for this other way of publishing? And so this is what John and I came up with. And so one thing we're fascinated with here, and we've seen it in a lot of different media and newspapers and other things, is this idea of putting images back to the exact place from which a cameraman took those images a long time ago. We're looking at stuff from about a century. And so it's intriguing to us in a few ways. One is from sort of a user experience idea of the people in the community like having to go to these exact places and be in this exact historical spot where a camera person stood and looked in the exact same direction, and how that engages with architecture, with objects, with the city street grid, with place, and this idea of history. That in some ways they're doing the exact same action, pointing a lens in the same direction. And then the other thing we're interested in, and these are sort of showing some pictures made from this, is this idea of these uncontrolled juxtapositions that happen between old and new, between, I think the last image here comes from Depression era, and Depression era economics on the State Street in Chicago and current economics on State Street in Chicago have some things in common and some things that are quite different, juxtapositions like this. Or between rail and cars, or pedestrian walkways and cars, all sorts of these things. And many things, I guess the most exciting is like things that we don't expect, that we can't predict, but we find coming back to us from people using it. And there's also some extant film. This is probably, I mean, it doesn't get much older than this. This is 1897. But it's both kind of intimidating and fascinating, taking an urban spot like this in the city and exactly what quantity of media you could talk about having been produced there, which I suppose is like an asymptotal line, right? Like in the 70s, the amount was produced there versus the 80s versus the 90s. So I think this is where we were going to sort of talk about some of the questions and future plans. There's a set of slides here that's just, this is from the Guardian newspaper, and an interactive set of images that they're continuing to put up and do different sets of, but this is around World War I and sites around London and in the UK. And the one coming after it, that's just running right after, is from Chile, and doing the same thing around images from the coup and contemporary Santiago. So it's interesting that this sort of desire is out there around taking these photographs and placing them. It's just, I'm surprised by what quantity I see coming from different directions. And I guess, you know, from sort of our thought experience, we're also wondering, like, so what is this desire? Like, what would be the realization of this desire?
It's interesting to me just because, so when we made that film, like Sunday, right, just this past week, we went out and I was holding the device while I was taking some images to create that. We were both just enjoying the visual experience. It was just fun to see it, right? And yet all along I've sort of, and being here, I'm reminded that to me the question with all of this media is this sort of so what factor, right? I mean, what are we doing it for, right? Is it just because we can? Is it just because there's technology available that lets you bring that tank image into this other context? Or is there something fundamental about that experience that really means something to the user, or provides you with a platform for saying something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to say, or revealing something to the person who's there having this sort of simultaneous experience with then and now that could get beyond just, it used to look like this, and now it looks like this, right? So is it storytelling? Is that really at its core, that it's an opportunity to say what the city used to be like and what it looks like now? Is they're in conversation with each other because what it looked like that and then because of a lot of circumstances, economic circumstances, community circumstances, you know, sort of the nature of the city of life at that time, and it looks like this now for a whole bunch of other reasons. That seems a little maybe esoteric. It seems a little verbose. So one of the things that we've been talking about is how do we bring some meaning to this experience? What would be a way to experience these images that would make somebody like any of you visiting Chicago want to do this? Or what would you want to get out of it? I mean, so we've gotten people who've said, I'd like to know what's happening. You know, why the city is different in that particular way, or where did that building go? Why did it get torn down? It was a beautiful building. Why is it gone? There are people who said they just want to know what they're looking at. That's it. They just want to know. Give me the metadata on that old photograph because I'm standing in the contemporary space. We've thought about the possibility of soliciting artists, you know, poets or musicians or local authors to look at the mashups after we create them and to riff on those in some creative way, and that we could put that in with those images. But part of I think the complication for us at this point is really knowing, now that we know it can work and we've got a platform on which to lay out these visual collections. To what end? So as we go through the rest of the conversations today, the rest of the presentations, that's really what I would love to have happen at the end of the time. I would love to get some thoughts from you all about what kind of experience you think could be meaningful here. If you were doing something in Chicago, or if you were doing something where you come from along these lines, what kinds of experience would you like to have? Do you have anything more to add, Alan?
I'm done. I'm wondering, should we roll through, or should we pause for 5 minutes of questions? Or
yeah, why don't we do that? So, does anybody have any questions about what was presented for either of us before we move on to the next presentation? Yes.
So, is the idea how will someone know they're in a corner of a state major or whatever, that there is a photo there which exists in the tribal?
Right. So, maybe that's one of the challenges we have is how to let people know that the app even exists, let alone that how to use it when you're there. Does it notify you? Does it tell you somehow that that you're at a place? Do you have a map that sort of indicates where to go, tells you where to go, so that you can have one of these experiences? The strip is about 5 blocks long, so if you've got the app on your phone and you're in that location, they're not very far apart. So you could imagine if you've gone there to do this activity, it wouldn't be difficult for you to find those. So it's a very formal place, right? It's a sidewalk with a curb and buildings on one side. The sidewalk's only 10 feet wide. You can sort of locate yourself relatively easy. It's not like you're trying to find a place between the big tree over there and the bushes over here, right? It's because it's downtown Chicago. There's only so many places you can be, so it's somewhat easy to sort of tell them how to get there.
I mean, the other answer to that is that a lot of these things have been done, or the ones I've been involved in have been done on either an exhibition or a show model, meaning like you do it the exact same way someone does an exhibition's happening, right? Those exact same venues. But what it's interesting, because in some ways it's more of a publication, right? Because it's out there. Like, for example, this thing in Sacramento just closed, but of course it's still published, or it can be. I mean, anytime that could be stopped. And so in some ways it would make sense to hook it up with this sort of distribution model of publishing instead of exhibition. And how do you combine those is an interesting question.
So I'm from Chicago, I'm in this area well, and I know it's not really near the Chicago district. And so I'm wondering if you even thought to do something similar for your building or in that neighborhood that could be an extension of the business.
So we sort of stayed away from, we sort of just stumbled into, let's pick a spot to see how it would work, how our coordination would work, what would be convenient for him, what would be doable for me. I didn't want to choose something that was going to mean a tremendous amount of research, finding images. We wanted to go with something that was relatively easy so we could get started quicker, and I knew there was a bunch of State Street stuff. So then it became a project about sort of seeing what it could be, right? If it was going to be something more than just a pure visualization experience. And but in Chicago, there are all sorts of things that are significant in our history that are gone now. I mean, so there are places like the World's Columbian Exposition, the Jackson Park. Now, if you go there, you see really no remnants of that, save a couple of architectural references. So that would be a great thing to do. And we've talked about that as a possibility. It creates different issues for the app because the way it's been built right now, it's recognizing the physical structures. And in Jackson Park, you wouldn't have any of that. So you'd really be thinking about it technologically in a different way. That said, something to do at the museum, something to do along the lakefront. That's sort of my current one. Is thinking about, we have a tremendous amount of photography and poster art and maps and things like that that were built for people to sort of navigate the lakefront for a variety of different reasons at different times in our history. So you could bring that media into a lakefront context, because even though the shoreline has changed somewhat, there are sort of opportunities to register an image there as well. So I think that's part of it, is thinking about what exists and what doesn't, and how the technology would work, and then just what would be the popular interest. What would people like to do? I mean, that's really at the core of all this. Which of these things is actually an appealing sort of experience to have? What about that would be appealing, and how does that help us figure out what we would do next?
And the other is thinking about it just on that last question. If we think about it in the model of like a zine, right? Meaning that it's not choosing a single location, but it's like then you choose another location, and each one is sort of talking to a different community, the community that's there or connected to there. And I think it's an interesting way to think about it. It's kind of more flexible than saying like, well, we have to choose one place, right?
We haven't talked to them. I haven't talked to them. Mostly because I think, for me, the challenge is always how to push the museum's content out of the museum. And the Chicago History Museum thinks that Chicago is our greatest artifact, right? It's there, it's got all this history in it, and if you could just get people to sort of look around them, they'd see that. The problem is that all of that facilitated stuff happens infrequently, right? The tours and the boat tours and the trolley tours and all that sort of getting a guide out in the city with people to do that. It doesn't happen all the time. You can come to the museum and hear, sort of do your own self-guided tour through our exhibits anytime you want. But to get that sort of face-to-face experience out in the city, you need something like the infrastructure that CAF built. And if you don't know what it is, they have a tremendously significant plan for providing tours of the city to people who come to Chicago. But that's what they do, right? That is their program, is about tours. And ours is not. So what we're trying to do is figure out how to push some of the content that we have, some of the material that CAF doesn't have, into that context so that we don't have to be there. People can sort of self-navigate and have these historical experiences on their own, which I think, is one of the great opportunities with digital media. It's something, if it's well designed, people can essentially be having a curated experience, an educational experience, a programmed experience, without any facilitation other than their own.
John, should we switch over to the next talk and take the rest of the questions at the end?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So if you have other questions for us, I think there'll be time at the end and we can come back to it. But I'm just going to say, Samantha Diamond is here, and she's going to talk about a couple of projects that she's been working on and that are related to the subject.
Good afternoon. Samantha Diamond. I'm from a company called CultureConnect. We do mobile technology and digital interpretation for museums and other organizations in the arts and culture sector. So today I'm going to talk about research that we've been doing this past year in conjunction with an organization called 4.0 Schools. This research was conducted around the field trip experience, and we spent our time interviewing and working with educators. So this was a education, school, teacher-oriented study, but it was all about the museum field trip. So the structure of this today is going to be a lot of setup in the beginning, who participated, our process, a lot on problem discovery, and then the second half will be on rapid prototyping by teachers, and then testing some of those ideas at the museum. And just a little bit about 4.0 Schools. They're a great organization based out of New York City and New Orleans, and they are one of the leading thinkers on education innovation, new school models, blended learning, really trying to fundamentally shake up the education system and how we think about it. And they're very committed to viewing museums as these centers of learning that should be very much a part of the K-12 experience. So they've been great partners along the way with this. So who participated in the study? It was teachers from grade levels 4 to 12 with anywhere from 2 to 20 years of experience. They had subject areas that were specialized, like art and social studies, but also generalists at the elementary level. The geographic area that we covered was primarily urban and suburban. We weren't focused on rural areas, but it was nationwide with a strong focus in New Orleans, New York, Connecticut, Georgia, Hawaii, California, Colorado, the Chicago area, and some other places. And then we also had a nice wide range of the different types of schools and programs. So private and public, charter, Title I, well-endowed institutions, and also after-school programs that all dealt with creating experiential learning at museums. So we did this research in 3 phases over the last year. We started first with in-depth one-on-one interviews that went on for a minimum of an hour with educators. And we asked them a series of standardized questions about before the field trip, the preparation experience, during the field trip, and then post-field trip experience. But it was also an open-ended discussion where we gave them the opportunity to kind of dig deep and ask them a lot of sort of non-leading questions to get them to kind of really reflect on the good and the bad of all of their experiences planning and executing field trips. Then we followed it up with a survey with a separate group of 30 educators, another way to sort of validate and refine some of the questions that we had. There was some free response, but it was largely a quantitative survey. And then at the end, we brought in conjunction with 4.0 schools, an additional 20 educators from around the country to New Orleans to participate in a day-long design workshop where the end result was prototyping some potential solutions that would help them solve specific aspects of the preparation process. So I just want to sort of preface this next part where we're doing the problem discovery with the fact that this was, the intended audience for this was originally the education community. 4.0 schools was very interested in making the field trip experience, a rigorous learning experience and bringing it back from where it had been. And they viewed it as something that was sort of becoming more of a reward experience than maybe how it was in the past, in particular in New Orleans, which is unfortunate because New Orleans is incredible history and 45 museums, and it's a population of 350,000 people. So it should be this rich experience that's part of everyone's life. School life, but they hadn't been seeing that, and it wasn't. So over the past year, though, we've had interest in the museum community, so in seeing these findings. So this next part is sort of, I'm highlighting the big themes that were discovered in thinking about the problems at the beginning stages of planning the field trip. So just make sure that shows up. So teachers talked a lot about how they don't really know what they're going to see ahead of time. They have a lot of problems actually preparing because they don't know what is going to be on a docent-led tour or what part of the museum collection they're going to be seeing, if it's even if it's part of the permanent exhibit. For self-guided tours, teachers frequently said that they only really received the materials when they showed up at the museum. And then teachers that do invest time in trying to prepare often say that it's very time-consuming and it's difficult to find information beforehand. And I think in all of those cases, there are many examples of this not being true in the museum world and also not being true among educators. They, I think some of the most successful field trips are when the educator comes to the museum for a pre-visit. And I think the overall takeaway here is that is just not always in the cards for teachers. And so what's often happening is that they have a very limited amount of time to prepare, or they are a teacher that's participating in the field trip, but they're not the field trip leader. So there's usually a point person for a grade level or a school. Sometimes it's in the administrative department, so it's not even someone in the classroom. So we just kind of found that overall, these were the different ways in which they were kind of struggling to get the information that they wanted. There was also a lot of discussion about the obstacles around cost and transportation. I'm not really going to address that here, but those, outside of this sort of content-focused preparation, this was the other sort of major challenge. And I think, eliminating fees and sort of working with the schools around subsidizing transportation seems to be the biggest thing to solve that problem. The other thing was museum logistics, simple things like knowing where the bathrooms are, especially for younger students, and chaperones and helping the chaperones prepare. That I'll address a little bit. So just kind of taking this from another perspective, I just want to read you these two quotes. One was from a museum education consultant who makes education tools, like non-digital education tools for teachers. And she says, teachers don't use pre and post visit resources. They say they want them. There's no time to incorporate them into the school day though. On the flip side, an educator from the Chicago area said in one of our interviews, I actually think educators constantly underuse the opportunities already offered to them by most museums in Chicago. They are there, they're waiting for us. And so I think that there's a lot going on there, why there are these differing perspectives. And I just want to kind of point to one of those things around discoverability and the mechanics of distributing a lot of these resources that are created. So I have this little chart here about clicks to completion. And I'd say one of the things we talked to with educators, and then we went on museum websites and looked at this for ourselves as well, is how many clicks does it take from the homepage for a teacher to get exactly the information, this PDF that you've prepared? How many clicks is that? Is it 25 clicks? Do they have to scroll 3 times to get to it? Sort of going through that exercise yourself as if you were a teacher might be helpful in seeing. And if it's more than 5 or 6 clicks, it's probably a little bit of a challenge for them. I'd also say that teachers are, they are in email all the time. And I would suggest emailing the actual link to the page on your website to them, attaching a PDF even that's print ready, and then also doing that 3 or 4 times in the communication process. So sending it once, it's okay to keep sending it and keep linking it in the email. So kind of moving on to during the field trip experience. So a couple of larger themes. I thought this was really interesting around preparing students psychologically for the field trip, and the teachers actually creating, in some cases, learning modules around museum etiquette. Not just the don't touch, but really understanding why. One teacher in particular had an entire lesson around understanding your emotional response to being in the physical space of the museum, and really helping the students reflect on being in this environment that may be, in some cases, foreign to them or the first time they've ever been in what sometimes can be very imposing buildings. And the other is thinking about how students the learning experience that they have in the museum aligning with the learning methods that are in the classroom today. So it's interactive, it's inquiry-based, it's a dialogue, thinking about creating that kind of education experience in the museum, even if it's self-guided, rather than the sort of traditional going from stop to stop and listening to a set amount of information. And then my 2 cents on this docent question that I get all the time on the museum side is around, does technology replace or aid the docent? Is this something that's going to displace them or in some way fundamentally change the museum experience in a negative way? And I would say the answer is that technology can both replace and aid. In a situation where teachers are having to do a self-guided field trip experience, which happens more often than you might think, having an aid, a technology aid there, is better than nothing. It's better than not having anything. And then in terms of when there is a docent there or a museum educator there, it's something that can provide additional in-depth information or visuals or media. But in no way, I don't think anyone would argue, educators as well, that it sort of replaces the role of the docent. And I share this quote with you from another Chicago area school teacher. An education staff member spent 60 minutes with our students and it was invaluable and really changed the experience, she told us. And then this last point is around tying things back to learning objectives and how the field trip extends back into the classroom. So teachers struggle to integrate the museum experience and the specific content that is being consumed during the museum experience back to specific learning objectives in the classrooms. And that kind of goes beyond taking the museum education tools and saying this is related to these Commons Core standards or these state standards. It also goes to that ability to preview and understand how the field trip could be a culminating part of a semester or a month-long set of lesson plans. Teachers also ask about assessment, and I know that can sometimes be a little bit of a sensitive topic because this is supposed to be an experiential learning experience, and it should be, have more flexibility than, say, learning specific lessons in math and then being tested on them. But at the same time, I think this is the world that teachers live in. They need to understand they're investing a lot of time, resources, and energy into these field trips. They need to understand how it connects back to the classroom. And then if they can put any kind of note towards, yes, the student has mastered these standards that are being addressed in this experience, then they can advocate for funding, they can advocate to their administrators, and they can rally other teachers in the school to support that activity even more. So now that we're done with sort of the problem discovery piece of it, we needed to narrow the scope because we're not going to try to address every single one of the things that came up in these conversations. So what we decided to do is focus on the pre-field trip experience, teacher preparedness, and then a little bit of connecting back to classroom objectives. We also made the decision that we are going to empower teachers first. So this is a little bit like the put the oxygen mask on yourself before the kids. Empowering the teacher in the classroom sets the students up for success, sets the teachers up for success, and then sort of later on, think about creating tools that are primarily and specifically for the students. And I do think age matters a little bit there for elementary and middle school age students. It's really important that this is focused on supporting the teacher, but as the students get older, especially in high school, they're self-selected, they're a little bit more autonomous, and it might be easier to start with tools for the student at that age. And then, as I said before, I'm not really focused on, in this particular talk, about solving a lot of the logistics problems, but one thing that can sort of be addressed in the information packets that we hear again and again from teachers is just really clear guidance around some of the basics, including specific concerns around etiquette for your museum. So house museums struggle a lot more with maybe sitting on furniture than an art museum would, and sort of pointing some of those things out to the teachers before they get there. So the third part of the process was a design workshop that we conducted with 4.0 schools. It was a one-day workshop, and the first part of the day was teaching these educators design thinking skills. So unbundling the problem, identifying assumptions, designing with empathy for the final end user in mind. So in that case, it was themselves, teachers. And then finally, at the end of the day, getting it together into groups and doing some rapid prototyping. These are just pictures of the early part of the prototyping process where they were outlining kind of, I guess, what would be considered like a user flow, and trying to express in their own words and not in tech speak and not in museum speak what they want the functionality of these products to do. And it was very important that we didn't tell them a lot about us. We didn't tell them about our capabilities of our platform. We didn't tell them about the museum world. It really wasn't about them designing something to satisfy anyone else's needs. It was about satisfying their needs and their problems. So you may be wondering, though, if you ask people to design the thing that they think they want, is it really the thing they want? If you ask people, 100 years, 200 years ago, whatever, about horses and carriages, they'll say, make me a faster horse. They're not going to say, build me a car. So we believed that and said, okay, how can we kind of put some of these ideas to the test? So we took some of the existing digital tools that we had already built with the New Orleans Museum of Art. This is our partner in New Orleans that was working with us on this. So at NOMA, we have an app for the museum, and it has several different types of tours within different parts of their collection. And we worked with the Sculpture Garden tour and modified it a little bit and gave it to a group of teachers that came in for a professional development day and basically tested some of the things that came out of that design thinking workshop. And so things that we learned from that is teachers want to customize. They absolutely want you to guide them and give them materials, as I have said a couple of times, but they also need the flexibility to make it their own and bend it to their will because they have unique things going on in their classrooms and they need to be able to match it up to that. They also need the ability to create their own pathways. So sometimes on the visitor side of things, we think about asking visitors to come in and select a series of artworks maybe that they want to see as they travel through the museum, and then they've assembled their own tour. In this case, it's very similar, but just a different context. So we had an elementary school teacher who said, I do take my students to the sculpture garden on a tour, but as you might imagine, in a sculpture garden, there are occasionally nudes, and that's not really appropriate for the kids that I'm bringing in, and it will also be distracting to them and not what I want to do. So how do I create a pathway through the sculpture garden that makes sense for my third graders? And then the high school teacher that was also there, who has more autonomous art students who don't need as much guidance, but she still wants to make sure they see certain pieces, is serving that population as well. And that just gets around the flexibility around creating pathways. And that was something that came out of the prototyping session, was definitely validated here. And then my last slide, I don't know what happened, is around another test that happened in gallery. So this is something that we've built with the NOMA that is installed in front of different artworks or installations in the museum. And it's an ability to do a deep dive into, say, the specific portrait of Marie Antoinette. You can kind of, if you click on Marie's face, you see this sort of blown up part of the painting blown up, and then contextual information, and then you can kind of discover on and learn about the artist or the time period or things like that. The user tests we did here with teachers was a little bit more around how they might use this kind of tool in the classroom to prepare their students or themselves before the trip. So, oops, I'm sorry. They absolutely, was interesting is they wanted to use it both before and both before and after the field trip in the classroom, but definitely waited beforehand. And they felt that if a student saw something in the classroom and then went to the museum and saw it a second time, that was going to truly reinforce whatever it is they were trying to teach them. They also, they definitely asked for children to use it, and they were interested in that from an assessment standpoint in the classroom after the fact. So being able to kind of review this material again outside of the museum and then asking questions, either free response or multiple choice, to kind of take note of mastery. And then my final note is just on this idea around curriculum alignment. So this is aligning to Common Core standards and other standards. It was noted in all but one of the prototypes that came out of that design workshop. But it's also interesting because it's an administrative detail. It's something that is very important to teachers. I want to know that this is grade level and standards aligned and subject area aligned, but as soon as you answer that question's answered and it's done, and that's not the directive of the tool anymore. And it really becomes instead about the content and about the learning experience. So that's it. Thank you. Yes. Yeah. So that would be.
Can you repeat the question, because there's no mic for that?
Oh, sorry. So the question was around, is this something that the NOMA can queue up different artworks, or the teachers themselves queue up different artworks and view it ahead of time themselves remotely? So yes, I would say that is the idea in terms of next steps. So as I mentioned, that this particular project was a general visitor-facing project, and these are kiosks that are being installed in the gallery. And so we took that, it's sort of another way of thinking about prototyping, is taking in a project you already have, adjusting it a little bit to kind of test another use case. And so that's what we did here. So we tested with educators to kind of validate all the things that came out of this study. And then the sort of next recommendation would be, hey, New Orleans Museum of Art or any museum, this is really a great tool that you could use if you wanted to with educators. So I think saying this is a worthwhile project to, path to go down is sort of the proof of that study.
What are you looking for from that? Share your thoughts. What's
So this is these are just 2 screenshots of a full interactive mock-up, and the share your thoughts section, it is, in this particular case, it was 3 questions that sort of, 3 multiple choice questions that were asking sort of for the user for their emotional response to some, related to some content that they had just viewed, and then the opportunity to submit their email address to see how other people were answering that question, so they would get like the other results emailed to them. And then there's sort of what's going on there as well is that the museum is able to collect email addresses and build their email list in a moment where they're creating value with the visitor. There was also some other interactive elements. There was a page where you could tweet as if you were Marie Antoinette. And it went to a separate Twitter handle. It did not go to the NOMA Twitter handle. But it was, it could be like, this is an interesting way to kind of put, now you've learned all about this person, put yourself in her shoes. What might she be thinking?
Hi, everybody. I am not Jessica Taylor, despite what my name tag says over there. Jessica is our global head of digital media at Antenna, and she's based out of London. And unfortunately, she was not able to travel here today, so I am going to do my best to represent a project to you that she and her team did in London. Just really quickly, these are some of the sites that we work with, and you can see clearly that people are interacting at all of these historic sites and museums in a very personal way. So we work with hundreds of sites all around the world, and we see the same thing over and over. People are really taking it into their own hands. And I think for users, it's as much of a personal experience, and it's about the experience of being there at whatever the site is, being with who you're with, and that's really what they're trying to document and capture. Similarly, that human experience, we all know, is now really mediated through devices in our daily lives. So I thought this was just a nice little snapshot to demonstrate that. The top image is the crowd outside the Vatican, waiting to hear the announcement of the new Pope in 2005. And you can see the exact same scenario in 2013, and obviously it looks a little bit different. So these are some of the things that we were thinking about, the human experience, the experience out on the streets. Obviously, we're doing really great work, all of you, inside museums to connect to users, to deliver content in engaging ways through all sorts of fun new digital technologies, also to collect data about them and take that back. And all that is well and good. But we thought, what if we could take all that creativity that we're putting into the museum gallery space and bring that outside into the streets? So that was kind of the impetus behind this project. What would that experience look like? You're not in a gallery. It's not the same controlled environment. Now you're kind of on the user's terms. You're in their daily life. So what's the right kind of experience for that? And we felt that obviously rich, engaging content is always key, but an element of discovery is something different. That's when you're out on the streets. So this is people in their daily lives. How can you get them? How can you catch them for a moment and make them stop and do something? And part of that, of course, is giving them the choice to engage. And if you give them a choice, you're not pushing something at them, you're not creating an environment for them where they have some expectations, then they get to become active users because they're choosing to participate. There's also an element of serendipity. Going with discovery, it's that surprise. It's something in your daily life, you're going to work, what's going to call you out of that? What's going to make you curious and what's going to play off your curiosity? And then in hand with that is that an experience should be location specific. It should give you the joy of standing where you are, where you might stand every day, but something different about it. And if you can do all of these things and bring them all together, then you should create an emotional connection with that user. So that's sort of the backstory behind what we did, Talking Statues. And really, we wanted to go out into the streets, think about art out in the streets. And that's statues. They're everywhere. They're very public. There's tons of people around them. We probably take them for granted as artwork all the time. And also, often they are people. They're representations of people. And people can tell stories. They can be characters. They can interact with you. So that is why we are working with statues. This actually was conceived by an organization called Sing London. They're a nonprofit, and they specialize in creating spontaneous moments of joy on the streets of London. So that is really where this came from. They approached us, and we worked with them through Antenna Lab, which is kind of our R&D arm, where we get to play and experiment with new technologies and with a lot of freedom. And we also partnered with the University of Leicester. They have a School of Museum Studies, so they will be taking the analytics from our analytic tools and collating them and producing reports. So that's a very important element of this too. So what were the goals and objectives for the project? Obviously, we wanted to bring new life to old statues, to make you look at something that you see every day but don't really see anymore. We really wanted it to be a theatrical experience. It's not meant to be educational. It's not meant to be didactic in any way. It's really meant to be emotional and to kind of capture that, really play off that element of surprise, create a little drama. We definitely wanted to have wide audience appeal. So statues, again, can appeal to everyone, everywhere. We also wanted to make sure that it had really simple access, a low barrier to entry, because you only have that 1 second when you're hopefully catching someone's eye out in their daily life and calling them out of it. So we wanted to make sure that as many people as possible could access this experience. For us, at least at Antenna Lab, we really wanted to think about which digital technologies people were using to engage. So we ended up providing a couple of alternatives so that we could see and compare. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. For us, though, we really wanted to play with the idea of NFC and see kind of how that's going out in the world, since it doesn't seem like it is. We use it all the time. All of our key cards here, probably, I assume, are NFC. And in London, at least, their Oyster cards for the underground are all NFC. But we don't really think about that on our phone, and we're not really using it in that capacity. Or are we? Or would we if the opportunity were presented? So that's something that we are definitely looking at. And then last, we really are thinking about this as a prototype. There are statues everywhere. So that's why the research and the analytics aspect is so important to this, because we really want to learn from it. So the three partners, we were awarded a grant from the National Endowment for Technology, Science, and the Arts. And Sing London is actually a performing arts affiliated organization. So they called on all their connections and were able to solicit some of Britain's really best known authors, poets, and playwrights to write monologues for all of these statues. Each statue has its own writer. There were no real guidelines, aside from not being, factually inaccurate, giving maybe a little context to who this person is. But again, we really wanted it to be theatrical and about the experience for experience's sake. So they had a lot of free reign. And then we partnered those with also some of England's best-known voices, actors and actresses, to bring the statues to life. So how did it work? The selected statues all have this blue plaque that you see on the left. And I'll show this in more detail in a minute, but we ended up using 3 methods of engagement. You can choose NFC, you can scan with a QR reader, or you can type in a very short mobile URL. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. So you choose your method, you do your quick scan, a mobile page pops up on your phone, you tap go, voila, your phone rings, and Sherlock Holmes is giving you a call and telling you a story in your ear. So it's very personal. This is what it looks like, and I'm actually going to play you a sample. You can see here the 3 types a little bit more clearly. And keep in mind, people don't know what this is. This is all you get, is this blue plaque. So are you going to choose to engage? Obviously we hope so. So I'm going to play you one. It's about 2 minutes long, but I really like it. And I think you'll see that it just really goes somewhere. So I'm going to play the whole thing.
Come on,
and hope that you hear.
stand a while. You can afford a minute or 2 with me before you board. Here on platform 1, the folk go past with them new wheelie cases far too fast and never notice me. Or if they do, from one quick shufty upwards, just like you. And don't, as I've made you do, stand and stare. They think they see hung round my neck a spare belt of bullets from our Maxim gun, not a muffler knitted by a mother for her son. November 11th, 1922, the soldier statue you've now stopped to view had its unveiling, and I felt the flag slide off my helmet and my chin, then snag for a second on this letter that since then, as she was better with knitting needles than a pen, I've puzzled out my mother's loving scrawl, while behind me bombs explode and mortars fall. This letter probably took her half the day. Remember what I always used to say, she writes. Take care that you keep warmly clad, the way she'd tell me when I were a lad. She'd check the weather, then she'd check I'd got the scarf she'd knitted round my neck. Out here in France, excuse my French, is bloody freezing in ice-crusted trenches. And because it's my mam's muffler that I'm wearing, I feel ashamed she'll scold me for that swearing. Her muffler kept me nice and warm until it wasn't just winter round me, but death's chill. Something unmotherly pulled the muffler tight, and I was robbed of all my breath and light. Those who found me would tell you that I cried for my warm muffler knitter as I died. Remember the Paddington soldier that you found once you're off and Bristol, Cardiff bound. Go, get into your carriage now, but when you're on platform 1 next time, we'll talk again.
Isn't that so great? I just love it. And how often do you get to hear poetry read to you? It's just not. Again, it's that moment. It's that experience of delight that just really takes you out of whatever you were just doing. Can anybody guess who that was? That was Patrick Stewart. Yes. So when the experience finishes, it leaves you on a landing page, which you can see on the left. So then you can finally start to figure out what you're doing here, and you can learn who wrote the monologue. They're all different. Some are funny, some are sad. They're not all poetry. So this was written by Tony Harrison, I believe, and then who voiced it. So it's different for every statue. And then from there, you can choose to explore if you want to learn more about what the heck this thing is. There's a map, so you can see where the other talking statues are around town. You can choose, to explore more. We can start tracking if you go see other statues in the future. So that is the experience in a nutshell. And then we're tracking it. So as I said, data analytics are an important component of this because we do really want to learn from what we're doing and see how people are using this, because it's kind of a different experience that we aren't controlling in a way. We're really asking a lot of them to participate. So we are, obviously we can see, how many people are choosing which statue and when. We are tracking which of the 3 methods of engagement they're choosing. And then we can see, where they go on the website. If the experience just ends and they're done and they go on with their day, or if it really engages them and they want to keep learning, we can see if then they go to other statues in the future. So this launched in August. So we have about 3 months of data. And so far we've had 19,000 or so users, which is pretty good because, again, remember, we're not pushing anything at them. We're really asking them to come to us. The 3 types of engagement, the 3 digital technologies we were testing out. Do you guys want to take a guess at which one has been the most used? It was actually the QR reader. So the QR, we're very much looking forward to the research, the reporting that comes back from the University of Leicester, needless to say. But yeah, the QR reader was about 55%, and the mobile URL was 35%, and NFC is still down at 10%. So that was very interesting to us, and I'm sure we'll get a lot more context with that as we really start to go in more depth with the data. And then just quickly, this is all of the statues represented. Peter Pan is the light blue. Peter Pan is very popular, followed second by Sherlock Holmes in the purple line. This is something that we are also doing now, incidentally, in Manchester as well. So we are really getting statistics from there too, and we could even compare city to city. One of the most interesting outcomes of this has been the crazy amount of publicity and press that it generated. We actually were quite surprised by the extent to which this has been covered. So you can see pretty much everybody covered it. It got international coverage for being something that's completely London-based. You can't listen to the audio on the web anywhere. You have to do it through the blue tags. It was even serialized on a BBC show, so they played one of the characters a night for a week, and it has a nice little comic strip even. So that's really exciting. I'm sure it obviously helped that there are some very big names behind this, but what is it that is so exciting to people? Is it that it's really public? Is it that delight, that experience of delight is so powerful? This is something that obviously we'll keep looking into as we go. And then the last thing is what's next. Still working on that. I'm sure the actual project team could speak much better to that, but we are expanding. So they're adding new statues, and actually these are 4 that are in the works, and keeping in that spirit of kind of a personal, really engaging experience, they actually have opened up a competition. So anyone can submit a monologue for one of these 4 statues, and if yours is selected, then it will be recorded, and you can attend the recording with whoever the voice is for your statue. So that's very exciting. Obviously, we're going to keep learning from this, but our goal is that, we might be able to do this again sometime. There are a lot of statues in the world. There are a lot of, now we know that we can animate, who knows, lots of different things we could have. Talking squirrels in the park, or talking trees, or talking buildings. It could be sculpture gardens. It could be in the gallery. So we really wanted to just try this, see how it went, and learn from it. So that is what we're doing now. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I will do my best. And if I can't answer them, I will connect you with the team, so I would be in the teal. It's talkingstatues.co.uk. So you'll see the landing pages for all of the statues, but you can't hear the audio. You have to go seek it out. But you can download the map and turn it into a tour for yourself if you wanted to go that route. Yeah. Oh, sure. We are tracking which device. That information I do not have, however. I can certainly get that for you. But I will say, I think part of the issue with NFC is that obviously Apple doesn't really isn't compatible with that except for financial transactions. And also, this is just me, but Apple seems much less prevalent in the UK. So that's something that I'm sure we'll be looking at too. You know, their device distribution versus ours is not at all the same. Oh, and I didn't repeat it, sorry. Yes. So the question is, you know, how much of this sort of, is the data skewed at all? How many people are coming just because there was so much press coverage, now they know about it? And that's a very good question, and I think that's something that will kind of shake out in the longer term. I believe it's a year-long project, so, you know, once that sort of buzz dies down, will we get different numbers? That's something that we would definitely look at. Yes, in the back. So from the time of the grant award, it was about 13 months, about 7 months of planning and 5 months of production. And I think a lot of the planning was taken up with, one, there were definitely a lot of logistics involved in getting permission to put plaques on these statues. Part of that is just particular to London because it's divided into its boroughs, so each borough had its own agency that we had to deal with. But yeah, the other challenge, right? The other challenge was just wrangling celebrities. Takes a long time. Yes.
Were you able to track how long people stuck with the audio?
Yes. I don't have that data because they didn't give it to me, but yes, that is something that we always track in all of our things. We can hear how long they listen. And I think that's something that will be really interesting to pursue. And this kind of goes back to your presentation. You know, is it the experience for the sake of the experience in the moment, or once you have them, are they going to keep engaging? Do you need to come up with a reason to keep them engaged, or is it fine to just have them listen all the way through and go on about their day? So that's definitely something that I think we'll think about. Yes, in the back. So the competition and the content part of it is actually through Sing London, that nonprofit who had the idea. As far as I understand, the city's really only involved in terms of the actual statues and, you know, placing the plaques and upkeep and all of that. Yeah, yeah. Anybody else? Do we have? Yes. I don't know the answer to that. Again, I'm glad it's you for both questions. But I do know that that's definitely something that we can capture and we are capturing. So I just don't have that actual data, but we'll follow up. Anybody else, or do we want to open it up to questions for everybody? And I'll go sit back down. Yep. get back there? Oh, the technology. Oh, well, there it is. Yes, and that will put you, I'm happy to put you in touch directly with the team if you can see that. If not, I can put it. Thank you.
So does anybody have any more questions for anybody up here?
I don't have a question, but you invited us to think about how your photo experience could evolve, and I apologize because I came in a little bit late, but that's the great benefit of a conference like this with so many different sessions to see. But I instantly seeing that, so apologize again because I don't know the part that I missed, but I think that it's just so ripe for a walking tour. And so having that opportunity of discovering some neighborhood and then the surprise of being able to see, that juxtaposition and that real virtual reality, and then calling out specific themes about that neighborhood that might not be the overt theme of the tour. It's a real invitation to be able to do that kind of thing. So trying to think about culling photographs that form part of like a sub-trail, some kind of narrative arc where you're walking along and, there's that feeling of discovery, I think would be a good way of thinking about how this could evolve to another city. So maybe that's about cuisine and, the generations of immigrants in a specific city and how the cuisine has been influenced by that kind of immigration over time. And you could show that through, the photographs and following cultures as they moved from, a city center to a suburb or something like that. I mean, there's so many different ways you could do that, but I think those photographs are just so evocative of being able to get people to start to think about much greater narratives than, architecture or street life.
I just wanted to follow up on what you were saying. No, I think just when I got back to my seat after speaking, Twitter was blowing up a little bit about this one question I posed about, do these tools replace the docent or aid the docent? And I completely agree with you that this is a great example of enhancing the walking tour experience. It's something that the tour guide wouldn't be able to do otherwise. And then I just also wanted to add that I think it would be incredibly valuable to teachers. I think they would absolutely love it. I think it would really aid in a very unique way any lessons that they would be teaching that would touch on history, economics, immigration, as you were saying. So I would think about that to the teacher audience.
I was going to say I can shout. I just had a question for you, really. You said it didn't really cost much, but what platform have you used for the AR?
This one, at least this prototype was built in Unity, so a game engine.
Okay, great. And I think it would really add to your immersion if you introduce sound or music and with
It's
your
interesting.
images.
We talked about the coincidence of building it on just State and Madison largely because, I don't know, we thought 0-0 was cool because there was these other factors, and so we sort of did it. But there is this thing if you're doing a tour on the street corner, like one of the busiest street corners in Chicago, there's a lot of extraneous elements. Like there's a lot of buses, for one thing. It's noisy. It's dangerous if you're out in the street. You can't be like looking at your phone in the middle of State Street because you might die. So it's funny. But so we were talking about sound, but it's also like we thought it would be better if we did it in another location where, it's quieter.
Or partner with Bose.
Yeah, just really loud.
Well, I mentioned earlier that we've gone after one small grant just to get funding for a staff person who would do scanning and the equipment to do scanning. So we were sort of pitched it to one local foundation to get a small amount of money, and they rejected the proposal. Their primary reason was because it's a prototype. That was interesting. So what we see as a big advantage for us is that, there isn't an end game here yet. We don't know what it's supposed to be yet. It's a prototype that's being developed, and we're going to do testing, and it's going to evolve over time. The agency didn't see any place for their name on it because there's no product in their mind. So they didn't want to give us any money for something until it's and they actually said when you're gonna finish it and you're gonna and the proposal you're making is to come up with something that will get published, then we might be interested, but we're not interested in just funding the development work.
What did you see as the advantage of going forward with this prototype as opposed to partnering with a group like History Pin, who is doing something a little bit similar? What sort of internal advantages did you see to that?
Well, and I don't know, Alan, if you have thoughts about History Pin, but I mean, for me, I guess I was more energized by the notion of getting people on staff interested in a product like this. So it's a little bit, in my mind, as much as it is interesting for me to do, I find that too many people in the organization don't really see themselves as part of the sort of the audience question, right? They see themselves behind the scenes. They see themselves as managers or organizers or employees, workers who don't really have a public dimension to their job. And that, in some cases, that's just true, right? That's just the nature of their work. But I think with something like this, especially because so much of this was part of the collections department and our rights and reproductions department that were involved with it, it really sort of made all of those people start to see the work they do as having a public dimension. And so while that wasn't maybe my initial thoughts about it, it certainly has become something that I think is really valuable because there are 6 or 7 people who don't ever work on exhibition projects. They don't ever work on public programs. I mean, they might scan images for an exhibition, but they're not necessarily part of the process. But they've been involved in this one in a creative way, and I think it's generated a different sort of project development buzz in the building. So that's my argument. It's not a pro or con on History Pin. It's just that I think internally it's a way to think about projects differently than the way we typically think about them, which is coming from an idea, which is largely comes out of the curatorial department. It then is sort of projectized, and it has educators applied to it, and it has designers applied to it. And we sort of have this tradition of marching through a project, and people want to participate, but they don't see themselves as having a role. And I think that this is just an opportunity, and I think maybe there's lots of opportunities in digital media. I don't know, Alan, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
No, unless you have a question for me in particular.
Anybody else? Well, thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference.